here's 5 unconventional powerlifting programming strategies, because if you only know how to program the basics, then you can only help people in basic situations, whether you're trying to program for yourself or help other people. We're first going to cover what classic traditional powerlifting programming looks like, and then we're going to move into these 5 variations, and not just how to make these changes, but who these would be applicable for. My name is Elrod-Erickson. I'm the assistant coach for Team USA Powerlifting in the IPL, and I own my own coaching company, Premier Power and Performance. So let's get right into it in terms of what classic programming looks like. Here's a skeleton of just top sets. So we're just looking at the main heaviest set of squat, bench, and deadlift for the week. We're ignoring any back down sets, lower intensity stuff that might come afterwards. Your secondary lifts, your accessories, all that kind of stuff for the sake of simplicity of this video and making it easy to follow. So here we've got block 1, block 2, and block 3. Each of these blocks is 4 weeks. And then we've got the top set, number of reps, and the RPE. RPE is the relative difficulty of something. An RPE of 7 is basically a 7 out of 10 difficulty, or 3 reps shy of failure. An RPE 8 would be 2 reps shy of failure. An RPE 9 would be 1 rep shy of failure. So over the course of a block, we're ramping up the RPE to increase the intensity. And then over the course of multiple blocks, we're going from 5 reps to 3 reps to 1 rep, because as we decrease those reps, again, we're ramping up the intensity further, because a single at RPE 9 should be much heavier than a set of 5 at RPE 9. So we're leveraging both rep range and RPE over time to ramp up the intensity. And then this 4th week here is only RPE 5 for all of the blocks, because it's meant to be lighter and easier, because this is serving as our deload week. It's a bit of a break from hard training to prepare you for the next block. So this is a rough outline of what classic traditional powerlifting programming might look like. And now we'll move into the first example of modifications of this. So this is how you might change things if someone had a lower absolute load, meaning simply less weight. There's a few reasons that someone might lift less. The first one is if they were not as skilled, not as experienced, and therefore not as strong. But you can also be experienced and skilled, a good lifter, and still lift less weight. For example, if you were a lightweight female lifter, a 50 kilo woman is expected to lift less than a 120 kilo man. So we've got 2 different situations here. This first one is for someone who is not as skilled, not as experienced. And then the second one is for someone who is skilled and is experienced, but both of them are those lower absolute loads like we were just talking about. So for someone less skilled, we want to be slightly more sub-maximal, because we want to stick to weights where they can maintain good position and practice good technique and build that skill over time. So for them, it would go RPE 7, 8, 8, and then 9. So all we've basically done is add 1 extra week in here at RPE 8, because that means they're getting more weeks of stressful, hard training prior to the deload, because they can probably handle that, because they're lifting lower absolute loads. With less weight on the bar, training's a little less stressful, and therefore they can probably do more of it before needing to deload. So we just added 1 extra week here at RPE 8, whereas for the more skilled lifter with low absolute loads, we could go RPE 7, 8, 9, and then 10, because the assumption here is they're experienced, they're skilled, they're going to hold good positioning even when it gets heavy and hard. They're just going to grind through maintaining good technique. So for them, it's okay to get up to those higher intensities. And again, since they're lifting less weight and it's a little less stressful, they can handle more of it. So we're doing 4 hard weeks of training rather than just 3 before the deload, because when you zoom out over the course of 3 blocks, that's going to be 12 hard weeks of training out of every 15, whereas with the classic programming, it would be 9 hard weeks of training out of every 12. So we can gradually bump up that ratio a little bit and get more hard productive training for someone who doesn't lift as much weight by doing this sort of strategy. And here's how it would look for less skilled versus more skilled. The next example is going to be if someone has 2 bench presses per week, which I would encourage for a lot of people. But here's how you might kind of offset one from the other. So let's say bench press day number 1 is higher reps with slightly lighter weights, so like a set of 8, whereas bench press day number 2 is our heavier one with less reps, like a set of 5. Or actually, let's skip over here to block 3 because I think it'll be most visible there. Say we've got this heavy single on bench press day 2 that we're really trying to push and express our strength well there. If this was like Friday or Saturday and earlier in the week, we'd done the higher rep day on, say, like Tuesday, a set of 4 at RPE 9 might fatigue you and start to impact your main heavy bench day here later in the week, the single at RPE 9. If you didn't want that to happen, the simplest answer would be, well, why don't we just flip the two? Why don't we just do the heavier day first, earlier in the week, and then the rep day later? Sometimes you can do that, and that's great. Other times you can't for a couple of reasons. Let's say this is a big lifter whose mobility is not that good, so doing a low bar squat really beats up their arms and shoulders. So whenever they go to do their bench press session after that, they don't perform as well. So maybe we want to keep this heavier main bench press day after the deadlift, as opposed to having it be after the squat session. So maybe we want it to be the later one in the week, or maybe they're peaking for a meet and we want that last heavy bench press to be about 7 days out from the meet, so like Friday or Saturday, rather than earlier in the middle of the week, like this day 2 would be, because either you're taking that last heavy lift really close to the meet if you're doing the Tuesday the week of the meet, or if you're doing it the Tuesday the week before the meet, then it's really far out. Now it's like 11 days out instead. So maybe they want to keep their bench press on this day, but they don't want it to be impacted by the higher rep day earlier in the week. How can we make that work? Here's the simple switch that you could make. Essentially, with that rep day, you're just starting at a lower intensity, and then you ramp up with your highest intensity being on week 4. Because that way, you're taking your highest intensity heavy bench day, the day 2, here on week 3, and then on week 4, you're taking that heaviest, highest intensity of the higher rep day. So it's just staggered back by half of a week. And that kind of works out because now you've got your deload for the heavy bench day here on week 4, and then what's essentially the deload for your high rep day here at the start of week 1. So it's just staggered back by about half of a week. And on that higher rep day, you may only need to go down to like RPE 6 because it's not quite as low rep and heavy. You may not need to deload it quite as aggressively. So you could simply ramp up going 6, 7, 8, 9 over the course of the block, whereas all of the other ones are having it where the heaviest lift is on week 3. That's a simple way to kind of offset those and allow your best strength expression on the heavy day and then still push the high rep one afterwards. The third of these 5 examples is going to be ramping up more aggressively over the course of the block. So with classic programming, you are keeping the same rep range for every week of a block. You know, all of these 4 weeks are sets of 5, but you're going 7, 8, 9, so changing 1 RPE or 1 rep per week. Because theoretically, a set of 5 at RPE 7 is a weight that you should be able to do for 8 reps. A set of 5 at RPE 9 is a weight that you should be able to do for 6 reps. So we've got these theoretical number of reps mapped out here. In a more aggressive ramping kind of programming style, you can drop both a rep and increase in RPE per week, which means that theoretical number of reps is changing by 2 per week rather than just 1. So what would traditionally changing just 1 RPE per week have taken you 11 weeks to get from 8 theoretical reps down to 2. Instead, you can do that in just 7 weeks here with the more aggressive ramping style. Or if we're saying going from 8 down to 4, you can do that in just 3 weeks instead of 7. So this lets you start at lower, lighter weights and then ramp up to higher intensities, heavier weights a little faster than that traditional style of programming would, which can be really helpful and applicable in a few situations. Currently, I've got a lifter who had a shoulder injury, and he's been rehabbing that. And he's finally ready to get back to doing low bar squats. Obviously, his squatting strength is not the issue. We've been doing high bar and SSB squats this whole time while rehabbing the shoulder. It was just we didn't want his shoulder in that sort of position to do a low bar squat. So as we add low bar back, we may do this ramping sort of style so that we're starting less intense and less demand on that shoulder, but we're ramping so that we can get back to heavier weights a little quicker than we would with just that traditional style. Or say a lifter came to me looking for coaching and they're 8 weeks out from a meet, but they haven't done much heavy training yet. Maybe we start with something like this, so it's a little less intense and we're not just jumping straight into really heavy training, but this still lets us ramp up to really heavy training in a little bit more of a prompt, quick fashion. So this ramping style of changing both an RPE and a rep per week can be a really useful tool. The next unconventional programming strategy we're going to cover is alternating deadlifts. This is going to be most applicable if someone has a really high absolute load that they deadlift. They're really strong, lifting a lot of weight. That would generally be probably 600 plus pounds for a male, about 3 times body weight, or for a female, maybe 450 or more, about like 2.5 times body weight. When you get that strong, your deadlifts can become much more stressful and hard to recover from. So we may look to do what's essentially like one up, one down, like one heavy week and then one light week, rather than having multiple weeks of hard deadlifts before getting to a deload, just to reduce that training stress and make it more manageable. So when doing this, I would go with RPEs of, 8 to 10. I would probably cut out the 7s because we're not having multiple weeks of training before the deload. We're just doing one and then one. We want to stick to slightly higher intensities for those heavy weeks. So we just go RPE 8, RPE 9, RPE 8, RPE 9, dropping the reps from 3s to 2s to 1s over the course of those blocks. And then those light weeks in between, we're doing 8 sets of 2 at 65% of the weight that you hit the week prior. So as you go through these blocks, the heavy weeks are probably going to increase in weight. You're probably not going to lift a triple at RPE 8 as heavy as you would a single at RPE 9. So these light weeks are also gradually getting a little bit heavier over time, which is good because you're probably developing conditioning and getting better at doing these high number of sets as you do them for more and more weeks. And the other important thing here is we want to keep really short rest times. This could be 45 to 60 second rest times, or you can set it up as an EMOM, meaning you start the set every minute on the minute. There's EMOM timers on YouTube, or you can do a stopwatch. As soon as it hits the next minute, you start your next set. The benefit of that is it encourages you to be quick and efficient with your setup, and push hard and do the reps quickly so that you're done faster and you can rest more before you have to start the next one. But having short rest times means that we can make this relatively difficult and get the relative intensity moderately high while still using really light absolute intensity, the weight on the bar. So that's productive training without being heavy so that you can recover before the next heavy training week, the week following. So this is a great strategy for really strong deadlifters. And then the last unconventional programming strategy we're going to go over is essentially the exact same concept, but now we're applying it to squats too. So this is unsyncing your squat, bench, and deadlift. In the classic programming, your squat, bench, and deadlift all kind of ramp up together. They get heavier over time. You're doing basically the same RPE on all 3 lifts. Now what we're looking at is just separating these 3 and having an independent timeline for each. So the situation where I've applied this before was I had a older male client. He was mid-40s. He was also on performance-enhancing drugs, so he was therefore stronger and his training was more stressful. He was also a pretty large guy, and he worked 2 jobs. He had kids. He was really strong. He was squatting in knee wraps, so his training was really stressful. His life was fairly stressful. His recovery was not the best. Therefore, he probably can't handle as much hard training before needing to kind of back off a little bit. So what we looked at doing was 1 up, 1 down on deadlift, like we just covered. But when it came to squats, we did 2 up, 1 down, rather than the traditional 3 weeks building up and then a deload. That was especially the case because he was squatting in knee wraps. So he's squatting more weight than he would be able to do in knee sleeves or raw. So again, squats were more stressful. We couldn't handle as many hard weeks before needing to back off. So each of these 3 lifts has its own timeline. Squats, we're doing 2 hard weeks of squats before every light one. So 2 weeks, light one, 2 weeks, light one, 2 weeks, light one. The deadlift is just like we talked about before. It's just alternating heavy, light, heavy, light. And then when it comes to bench press, we stuck with a more traditional 3-to-1 kind of hard weeks and then a light one. And I think generally you can get away with that for almost everyone for a couple reasons. The first one is your bench press just isn't as heavy. It's not as taxing or demanding. And then the second thing is we've only really got one upper body lift as powerlifters. It's just the bench press. Whereas when it comes to lower body training, we have both squats and deadlifts. They kind of overlap a little bit in the recovery demand. So we can get away with a little bit more bench press than we tend to on squat and deadlift. So that's why we've got 3 up, 1 down there, whereas less for the other 2 lifts. So this worked really well for that client I was describing. He added 140 pounds to his total for the first meet and then 80 pounds to his total for the next meet. This seemed to work really well for him, but it's not what I would default to for everyone. That was just a special situation based on his life factors and stuff. So if you're interested in how to kind of individualize those sorts of decisions to suit you, I made a video called Powerlifting Programming, the Key Aspects. It kind of covers those different factors that go into how much training you're likely to be able to handle and how to individualize to yourself to make those changes in terms of frequency, intensity, volume of your training. So you could check that video out if you're interested. I'll try and put the little pop-up here in the corner. But that's kind of how we ended up at that sort of decision, and it seemed to work really well for him. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you have any sort of questions, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to chat about it. And then also, if you're interested in information about my coaching services or you want some additional free resources, you can visit liftpremier.com. I've got a guide on how to transition to sumo deadlift, a guide on training with limited time in the gym. I have a free attempt planner sheet. So for your next powerlifting meet, if you want help choosing your numbers, you can use that. And I've got tons of articles and additional free resources on there. So if you're interested, you can go check it out at liftpremier.com.